The cold came in off the mountains like something alive that morning. It pressed against the canvas awnings of Millbrook's Saturday market and slipped between the gaps in Sarah Calloway's gloves, finding the knuckles settling in. She didn't complain. She never did. She simply pulled the cider thermos closer and rearranged the jars on the front table. Blackberry preserve, wild plum, a deep amber apple butter that smelled of cinnamon, and something older, something like October afternoons a long time ago. Her stall was the third one from the entrance. She had stood in that same spot for 11 years, every Saturday from 6 in the morning until the last customer left. The regular people knew her. Old Pete Halverson always bought 2 jars of plum before he even said hello. The Nguyen girls from the bakery next door saved her a cinnamon roll on cold mornings. And the children always stopped to look at the apple display because Sarah arranged them like a kind of small red architecture. Neat pyramids of Cortland and Empire, and a few late Honeycrisps she'd sourced from a farm up in Hardwick. Her hands were not pretty. She had stopped expecting them to be. They were strong and wide and chapped at the edges, with short nails and the faint pink stain of berry season that never quite washed out, even in January. Those hands could split wood, seal a jar, braid Lily's hair. Though Lily was 28 now and lived in Portland and didn't need her hair braided anymore, she called every Sunday at 2 in the afternoon. That was the shape of things. That was the geography Sarah lived inside. The small gold locket rested at her collarbone, under 2 layers of wool. She didn't take it off. Not to shower, not to sleep. Some people who knew her well enough had asked about it once. Only once. She smiled when they asked, and the smile was genuine. But it closed the door so quietly that no one ever knocked twice. The black SUV arrived at 8:23 in the morning. It was the wrong car for Millbrook. It was the wrong car for the whole county, really. One of those high-gloss Manhattan vehicles that seemed to operate in a different atmosphere, where the roads were smooth and the sky was polished. It stopped at the edge of the market square with a kind of deliberate stillness, and then the door opened. The woman who stepped out was 67. Maybe 68. Charcoal cashmere coat, belted. Silver hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but wasn't. The kind of woman who had learned very early how to take up space and had been practicing ever since. She looked at the market with the expression of someone reviewing an invoice they expected to dispute. Sarah saw her before she was halfway across the square. Her hand went to the locket. She didn't know she did it. The woman stopped at the stall. She looked at the apples. She looked at the jars. She looked at Sarah the way you look at a door you're not sure leads anywhere useful. "You're the caretaker?" she said. Not a question. The way you say it when you've already decided the answer is probably disappointing. "I am," Sarah said. "Sarah Calloway." She extended her hand. The woman shook it briefly, like a formality she was being asked to observe. "Eleanor Harrington, I was told by the agency you were reliable. They said you had experience with remote properties." "I do. I've wintered 2 cabins up past the county road. One belonged to the Dearborn family." "They'll give a reference if you need one." Eleanor glanced at the stall again, at the hand-lettered labels, at the twine-wrapped herb bundles. "You sell apples," she said. It landed like a small, carefully placed insult. "Among other things," Sarah said pleasantly. "The property is a dacha, a forest house about 14 miles northeast of here. My husband's family built it. The regular caretaker, a man named Grover, broke his leg last week. There's a wood stove that needs daily attention, pipes that need monitoring in the freeze, and I'll be arriving myself sometime in the next 10 days to collect some of my husband's personal effects." She paused. "I don't expect the work to be complicated, but I expect it to be done correctly." "I understand," Sarah said. "The rate is what the agency quoted, not negotiable." "That's fine." Eleanor studied her for a moment, not warmly, not curiously, just the way you study something you're about to sign a contract with. "I'll get the keys from the car," she said, and turned away. And Sarah stood very still behind her table of winter apples, one hand resting lightly on the thermos, the other closed around the locket beneath her coat. She had not seen Eleanor Harrington in 31 years. The last time Eleanor had been laughing, the bright, careless laugh of a girl who had just won something, and Sarah had been sitting on the steps of a Greyhound bus with everything she owned in a canvas bag, watching the Texas light turn gold on a town she was never coming back to. Eleanor had not looked back then either. The drive took 40 minutes. Sarah followed the black SUV through the village, past the gas station, past the last mailbox at the edge of town, and then into the trees. The road narrowed. The snow deepened. The pines pressed in from both sides until the sky was just a pale strip overhead. She kept her eyes on Eleanor's taillights and tried to breathe slowly. The Daca appeared around a long bend in the road. It was bigger than Sarah had expected. Dark wooden fieldstone, wide covered porch, 3 chimneys. It sat at the edge of a clearing like it had always been there, like the forest had simply grown up around it over the decades. The windows were dark. The snow on the porch was undisturbed. Eleanor was already out of the SUV before Sarah had even turned off her engine. She stood at the base of the porch steps with her arms crossed, looking up at the house. Just looking. For one unguarded moment, something moved across her face. Something that was not contempt, not efficiency, something quieter and much older. Then she heard Sarah's door and turned around. "I'll show you the generator first," she said. "If that fails, nothing else matters." The generator was in a shed around the back. Eleanor walked her through the startup sequence briskly, like a woman reading a legal document. Fuel levels, choke position, the breaker panel. "The pipes on the north wall are the problem," she said. "They froze 3 winters ago. The caretaker before you let it happen. You will check them every morning and every evening." "I understand," Sarah said. "Do you know what frozen pipes cost to repair?" "I do." Eleanor looked at her briefly, then looked away. "Fine." Inside, the house smelled of cedar and cold and something faint underneath. Wood smoke from long ago, maybe, or just time. Richard's fishing rods hung in a row beside the front door. 4 of them, the cork handles worn smooth. His reading chair sat directly in front of the stone fireplace, angled just right to catch the light from the window. There was a wool blanket folded over the arm of it. Eleanor walked past all of it without looking. She handed Sarah a single printed page. "Your duties. Morning fire by 6. Generator check at 6:30. Grocery runs when the list is ready. You will sleep in the room at the end of the kitchen hallway. The sitting room is not for your use. The study." She paused. "The study is locked. It stays locked." "Of course," Sarah said. "If something breaks, you call the number at the bottom of that sheet. Not me, the contractor." "All right." "I don't expect conversation," Eleanor said. "I came here to be quiet." "Then I won't bother you," Sarah said simply. Eleanor gave her one more of those brief, assessing looks. Like she was trying to decide whether simplicity was a performance or just stupidity. Then she went upstairs. Sarah heard her footsteps cross the ceiling. Stop. Then nothing. Sarah carried in the firewood. She laid the fire and lit it and stood for a moment watching it catch. Then she walked back down the hallway to find the kitchen, and stopped. The wall beside the staircase was lined with photographs, framed and hung in a careful row at eye level. She had not noticed them in the dim light before. She noticed them now. Richard at maybe 30, standing in front of a lake, squinting into afternoon sun. Richard on a boat, laughing at something out of frame. Richard, older, gray at the temples, leaning against a fence post in what looked like a garden. And then the last one. Small frame, black and white, a high school, flat-roofed, brick, a parking lot baking in Texas sun. A boy standing out front, 17 or 18 years old, one hand raised to shade his eyes, a backpack slung over one shoulder. The year written in pencil on the bottom edge of the photo, 1987. Sarah reached out and straightened the frame with one careful finger. It had been hanging slightly crooked. It hung level now. She walked onto the kitchen. That night, after the pipes were checked, and the generator was humming, and the fire in the main room had settled to a low, steady glow, Sarah heard a sound from Richard's study. Not footsteps. Not the rattle of a locked door being tried. Just presence. The creak of a chair. The absolute silence of someone sitting very still in a dark room. Eleanor had found a way in. Sarah stood in the hallway outside the kitchen for a long moment listening to that silence. They were both haunted by the same man. She had understood that the moment she saw his photograph on the wall, but they were haunted by entirely different versions of him. Eleanor's Richard had been a husband. Distant maybe, difficult maybe, but hers. Sarah's Richard had been a boy with a backpack and the sun in his eyes, who had once told her she was the only person in Amarillo he could talk to, who had kissed her once behind the gymnasium in October of 1986 and told her things were going to be different. They hadn't been different. But that wasn't his fault. She went to her small room off the kitchen, lay down on the narrow bed with her coat still on, and stared at the ceiling while the wind picked up outside and the pines began to move. Somewhere above her, in a locked room that was apparently not so locked, Eleanor Harrington sat alone in the dark with whatever was left of her husband, and the snow was already falling harder. The morning of day 2 arrived without ceremony. Sarah was up before 5, the way she always was. Old habit, from the market. She dressed in the dark, started the stove, put the coffee on. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and pine resin. Outside, the snow had stopped sometime in the night, but the sky was the color of old pewter, and she didn't trust it. Eleanor came downstairs at 8:45. She was dressed impeccably, as if someone might be watching. Gray wool trousers, a cream cashmere sweater. Her silver hair was pinned back. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the coffee cup Sarah set in front of her. She lifted it, took one sip, set it back down. "Too weak," she said. "Do it again." Sarah took the cup back without a word. Poured it out. Started a fresh pot. Stronger this time. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Eleanor read her papers at the table and said nothing further. An hour later, Sarah brought breakfast. Soft scrambled eggs, toast, a small pot of the apricot preserves she had brought from her own stall. She set the tray down carefully. Eleanor glanced up at Sarah's hands where they rested on the edge of the tray. "Do you use gloves," Eleanor said, "when you handle food?" "Those hands have been on market produce all day." Sarah looked at her steadily. "I washed them, Mrs. Harrington." A small smile, nothing more. Eleanor picked up her fork. That was the thing about Eleanor's particular brand of cruelty. It was never loud. It was never theatrical. It required almost no effort. It was the way a woman waves away a moth, not with malice, just with the certainty that the moth is an inconvenience and nothing more. Sarah went back to the kitchen and washed her hands again, though they were already clean. Around noon, a truck came up the drive. A delivery from the village. 2 boxes of groceries, a wrapped package of books, and a manila envelope marked with the return address of a law office in Manhattan. Eleanor signed for it at the door without expression. She carried the envelope to the study and closed the door behind her. She was in there for just over an hour. When she came out, her face was pale, not upset exactly, rigid, like something had been pressed flat inside her and hadn't fully settled yet. She went to the window in the sitting room and stood there with her tea, looking at the tree line, the bare birches, the dark wall of pines beyond. She didn't speak to Sarah the rest of the morning. In the afternoon, Sarah started on the upstairs hallway, dust, mostly. The house had been closed since October. She moved slowly, methodically, the way she did everything. She wasn't in a hurry. She had nowhere else to be. That was when she found it, pushed against the wall beneath a window seat, almost hidden in the angle of the eave. A cedar chest, old, dark with age, the wood smooth from years of handling. The initials on the latch were worn, but still legible. IRH. She crouched down. The latch was stiff, not locked, just stubborn the way old things get. She worked it open. Inside, wool blankets, neatly folded, a leather-bound journal with the word fishing embossed on the cover. A tin of old Lois, the kind her father used to keep. She lifted the top blanket to fold it properly, and that was when she saw it. Just a corner, just the edge. Cream-colored paper pressed flat against the lining of the chest slipped into the seam as if it had been placed there deliberately. Or hidden there, the corner of an envelope. She reached for it, and then she heard footsteps on the stairs. She lowered the blanket, closed the chest, stood up and smoothed her apron in one quiet motion. By the time Eleanor appeared at the top of the staircase, Sarah was already running a cloth along the windowsill. Eleanor barely looked at her. "The guest bathroom needs attention," she said. "The grout around the tub." "Of course," Sarah said. Eleanor went back downstairs. Sarah stood very still for a moment. She looked at the chest. She didn't open it again. She didn't know why. She just wasn't ready, or maybe the letter wasn't ready either. That evening, Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway while Sarah was finishing the dishes. She stood there for a long moment, just watching. "You're from Texas originally," she said, not a question. She'd read the agency file clearly. "Yes," Sarah said. "Amarillo." Eleanor's expression didn't shift. "I passed through Amarillo once," she said. "A long time ago?" A pause. "I can't imagine staying." She went back to her room. Sarah stood at the sink with her hands in the dishwater and felt something cold move through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Eleanor didn't remember her. That much was clear. 30 years had passed, and Sarah Calloway of the market stall with the rough hands simply did not register. But she remembered Amarillo. And that meant the memory was in there somewhere. Buried, maybe. Covered over. But present. Sarah drained the sink and dried her hands on the dish towel and stood there in the quiet kitchen listening to the wind start up again in the pines. The question wasn't whether Eleanor would remember. The question was what would happen to both of them when she did. She had known the name. That was the thing she kept not thinking about. She had seen the listing on the community board at the feed store, Harrington Property, Cedar Lake Road. Temporary caretaker needed, January through February, and she had read it twice. She had read the name. She had set the paper down, walked to her car, driven home, made tea, sat at her kitchen table for 40 minutes, and then driven back and written her number on the slip. So the question wasn't whether she had known. She had known. She was thinking about this in the cereal aisle of Pete's General Store, when Pete himself came around the corner with a pricing gun and stopped to say hello. Pete Garland had run the store for over 30 years. He had a broad face and a slow voice, and he remembered everything. "Getting set up out at the Harrington place?" he asked, nodding at her cart. "Just supplies," Sarah said. "They've got most things already."
"Big old house," Pete said. "You settled in all right?" "Fine so far."
He set the pricing gun on a shelf and leaned against the freezer case, the way men like Pete do when they've decided there's no particular hurry. "Sad about Mr. Harrington," he said. "Richard, he used to come up every fall. Just him, most of the time. Quiet man, never made a fuss." He paused. "You know, he used to buy extra every time he came in. Bread, canned goods, whatever we had. Left it all for the food bank over in Dunmore. Never told anybody. I only knew because I did the totals." Sarah kept her hands on the cart. "That sounds like him," she said, and then heard herself say it and went still. Pete glanced at her. "Did you know him?" The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Outside the store windows, snow was starting again, soft and indifferent. "A long time ago," Sarah said. "A very long time ago." Pete nodded like that made perfect sense, because in a small town it usually does. People carry long histories. You learn not to push on them. She loaded the last 2 bags into the back of the truck, and Pete held the door for her, and she drove out onto Route 9 with the wipers going and the pines closing in on both sides of the road. A long time ago. Amarillo, Texas, 1987. She had been 17 and on scholarship and the daughter of a man who fixed engines for a living, and she had known from the age of 12 that her way out of the town was through books, not money, because they didn't have any. She was good at books. She was very good.
Up English, 2nd row, 3rd seat. There had been a boy in the 4th seat who argued about Steinbeck in a way that was actually worth arguing back at, and his name was Richard Dean, and he was kind. Not performing kindness. Just kind, the way some people simply are, without needing anything back for it. By October, they were walking home the long way. By November, she knew she had never talked to anyone the way she talked to him. She remembered his handwriting on the margins of library books.
She remembered the smell of his jacket. She remembered laughing in his truck in a gas station parking lot about something neither of them could even explain afterward. Just laughing until they couldn't stop. Eleanor Marsh arrived in January. Dallas, private school Polish. A kind of certainty that Sarah had no name for at 17, but could see very clearly. The way Eleanor entered a room as though she had reserved it in advance. Sarah had not understood what was happening at first. That was the part she had carried longest, the part that still wore at her sometimes in the small hours of winter nights. She had not seen it. She had trusted the wrong stillness. By March, Richard had grown quiet in ways she couldn't reach. By April, Her mother was sick in Houston and Sarah was gone. They wrote letters for 8 months. Then the letters stopped. And it was only years later, through a woman named Connie Ruiz, who had kept in touch with people Sarah had not, that she learned the letters hadn't stopped at all. They had just never arrived, not one, in either direction. The wipers pushed snow across the glass. Sarah turned onto Cedar Lake Road and felt the tires settle into the packed ruts from earlier that morning. The pines were heavy and dark on both sides. The sky was the color of old pewter. The house was still 4 miles out. She gripped the wheel and finally let the question come up the way it had been waiting to, quiet and patient, for 2 days. She had seen the name. She had put down the paper. She had come back. Why? Not to confront Eleanor. She wasn't built for that kind of scene. And she knew it. Not for money, though the money was real and she needed it. She drove and didn't answer herself because the answer that kept surfacing was the one she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Richard had owned that house. Richard had gone there every fall, alone and quiet, buying bread for strangers. And some part of her, the part that had never fully let go of the boy in the 4th seat, needed to stand in the rooms where he had been. The house came into view through the trees. A light was on in the upper window. Eleanor's room. Sarah parked and sat for a moment with the engine running. She had come to be near something. She just hadn't admitted yet what it was going to cost her. She got out of the car. The cold hit her like a door swung open. Sharp, deep, mean, the kind of cold that doesn't negotiate. She pulled her coat tighter and walked to the porch, and before she even reached the steps she could hear it, the wind shifting in the tree line. A low building sound, like something waking up. Pete had said might get some snow tonight. Pete had clearly not looked at the sky. Inside, she stamped her boots and hung her coat and stood in the hallway listening. The house ticked and settled. Upstairs, Eleanor's light was still on. Sarah checked the time on the kitchen clock. A little past 6, she went to the window. The trees were already moving wrong. She didn't panic. She had lived through 12 Vermont winters. She knew the difference between a snowstorm and a blizzard, and what she was looking at was not a snowstorm. She moved. She checked the pipes first, then the firewood stacked beside the main hearth. She banked the fire up high and steady, the kind that would hold through the night without being fed every hour. She found the candles, 3 boxes, thank God, and set them at the kitchen table, the hallway, the top of the stairs. She checked the generator in the mudroom, pulled the cord twice to make sure it caught, and made a mental note of the fuel level, enough for the night, maybe into morning. At 8 p.m. the lights flickered, then they died. The generator hummed on after a few seconds. The single bare bulb in the kitchen came back. The rest of the house stayed dark. Eleanor appeared in the sitting room doorway. She was wearing a dark robe and her hair was down, and she looked, for the first time, like a woman who did not have everything arranged exactly as she preferred. "Will the road be passable?" she asked. Her voice was different. The lacquer was gone. What was underneath was quieter and older. "Not until morning at the earliest," Sarah said. "Probably not until tomorrow afternoon." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Fine," she said, and she went back inside. Sarah finished moving the last of the candles. She put a pot of water on the gas range. The stove at least ran on propane, and made tea and sat down and listened to the blizzard find its full voice outside the walls. An hour passed. Then Eleanor came back. She was carrying a bottle and 2 glasses. Richard's Scotch, the good kind. The bottle that had been sitting on the sideboard since Sarah arrived untouched. Eleanor set both glasses on the kitchen table without asking anything. She sat down across from Sarah. She poured. Sarah stared at her. "I don't sleep well in storms," Eleanor said. It was the most human thing she had said in 2 days. Sarah picked up the glass. "Neither do I." They sat. The fire popped. The wind hammered the windows like it had a grievance. The candle between them bent sideways and straightened. Eleanor drank. Sarah drank. Then Eleanor said, almost to herself, almost like she'd forgotten Sarah was there, "Richard loved this place in winter. He said the snow made everything honest. No leaves to hide behind." She paused. "I never understood what he meant." Sarah looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at the robe or the glass or the sharp bones of her face. She looked at the whole of her. She saw an old woman who was lonely, who had been lonely for a very long time, and who had maybe chosen it or had it chosen for her in ways that had happened so long ago that she couldn't tell the difference anymore. Sarah said nothing. Eleanor refilled her glass. She was looking down at the table. He kept secrets from me, you know, Richard. Her voice was level, careful. I found out after he died, he had been sending money to someone for years. She looked up directly at Sarah. I don't know who, she said. Isn't that strange? And Sarah's heart stopped. She held the glass in both hands and said nothing and kept her face very still, the way you keep a door still when you know something large is pressing against the other side. The candle bent again. The blizzard didn't stop. Sarah did not sleep. She lay in the small room of the kitchen and listened to the blizzard and thought about what Eleanor had said. Sending money to someone for years. Lily's college fund. Sarah had always believed it came from a distant relative's small estate. Some great-aunt she had never met. Some modest inheritance that arrived at exactly the right moment. And the envelopes. One every December for 15 years, always cash, always postmarked from a different city, always enough to matter. She had told herself she didn't need to know where it came from. She had told herself a lot of things over the years. It was easier that way. At 2 in the morning, she got up. She took a candle from the nightstand. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the wall. The cedar chest was where she had left it. She lifted the lid, moved the blankets aside with careful hands, and found the corner of the envelope again. This time, she took it. She carried it back down to the kitchen. She sat in the chair closest to the fire and held the envelope in both hands without opening it. Just held it. The paper was old. It had been there a long time, waiting. Her name was on the front. Not her married name. Not the name people used at the market when they bought her apple butter and said thank you and moved on. Her old name. Her first name. Sarah Pruitt. Written in handwriting she would know anywhere, in any room, in any dark, in any lifetime. She sat with it for a long time. The fire burned low. She got up and added another log. She put the kettle on and made tea she didn't drink. Outside, something was changing. The blizzard was easing. She could feel it the way you feel a headache lifting. The wind shifted from screaming to something quieter, something almost like stillness. She opened the letter, 4 pages, handwritten. Dated 8 months before Richard's death. It began, Sarah. If you are reading this, then the Duchess found a way to give it to you. The way it always found a way to give me back whatever I needed most. I have been trying to write this letter for 30 years. She read the first paragraph. Then she put it down. She pressed both hands flat on the pages, face down against the kitchen table, and she sat very still. The fire crackled. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard shifted in the cold. She didn't lift her hands because she already knew, from 1 paragraph, from 31 words, she already knew that everything she had built her understanding of her own life upon was not the whole truth. The college fund, the envelopes, the years of just barely making it through. Never quite alone even when she felt most alone. He had known where she was, all that time. He had known. Her hands were shaking against the paper. She made them stop. She breathed. She looked at the window where the darkness was no longer absolute. The faintest gray was beginning at the edge of the glass. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it. Morning was coming. And Eleanor was asleep down the hall. Sarah thought about that. Eleanor, who had said his name at the dinner table like it still cost her something. Eleanor, who had looked directly at her when she mentioned the money. Who had said I don't know who with an expression that was either the truth or the most controlled lie Sarah had ever seen. She looked down at the letter. 4 pages, 30 years, and a dead man's handwriting in the firelight, waiting to tell her everything. She turned it over. She smoothed the first page flat with the heel of her hand, and she began to read. The fire had burned low. Outside, the blizzard had settled into something quieter, just steady snow, soft against the glass, the kind that doesn't warn you. It simply arrives and stays. Sarah read slowly. The first page was careful, almost formal. Richard wrote the way he had always spoken, measured like a man who chose each word because he was afraid of the ones he might use instead. He wrote that for years he believed she had stopped writing first. He wrote that Eleanor had told him, not cruelly, not at the time, just as a fact, delivered quietly, the way you tell someone something that is already decided. That Sarah had met someone in Houston, that Sarah had written a final letter asking not to be contacted again. He wrote, "I was 18, I was heartbroken, and Eleanor was there and certain, and I was not strong enough to question what I wanted so badly not to be true." Sarah stopped. "Read that line again." She folded the first page back, moved to the second. He found out the truth 15 years into his marriage, not from a letter, not from any careful unraveling. Eleanor told him herself, not as a confession, as a weapon. They were fighting about something else entirely, something small, the kind of argument that is never really about what it says it's about. Richard wrote the exact words Eleanor had said. He put them in the letter the same way they had been said, chua, flat, dismissive, with that particular cruelty that doesn't even bother raising its voice. "You think you missed something? You missed a girl who sold apples at a roadside stand. I did you a favor." Sarah read that sentence very carefully. Then she set the page down on her knee for a moment and looked at the fire. She was surprised to find she wasn't shaking. She felt something colder than anger. Something that had been waiting a long time to have a name. She picked the page back up. He wrote that he sat in his car for 4 hours after that he couldn't go back inside, that he didn't know what to do with something that had happened 30 years ago and couldn't be undone and was sitting on his chest like a stone. He wrote that he found her the way anyone finds an old classmate, not with investigators, not with money, with the ordinary internet on an ordinary night when he couldn't sleep, and typed her name because he was tired of not knowing. He found the market stall. He found Lily's school. He started sending money. He wrote, "I'm not proud of this. It was what I could do without destroying everything I had built. My children, my marriage, the life I had made from the wreckage of that platform in 1988. I tell you this not to be forgiven. I tell you this so you know it was not nothing, so you know you were not forgotten." Sarah turned to the last page. His handwriting was looser there, like he had stopped being careful. "Not for a single year. And the man who pulled away from you on that platform was a coward, and I have been paying for it in the only currency I had left. Silence and distance and money that could never say what I actually meant." She read the final paragraph twice. "Eleanor will find this letter, or someone will. I am leaving it here because this is the only place that was ever truly mine. I am asking her, if she is reading this, to find Sarah, to tell her the truth herself, to do what I could not. I know Eleanor. I know what she is capable of when she chooses to be better than herself. I have seen it. I am betting on it now." Sarah folded the letter, slowly. Along the original creases, the ones worn soft from being opened and refolded, the way something is held when it can't be sent. She held it in both hands. She looked up. Eleanor was standing in the kitchen doorway in her robe, hair loose, older looking than Sarah had ever seen her. She was holding her empty scotch glass from last night. Her feet were bare on the cold floor. She had been there long enough. That much was clear. Her face gave nothing, but her eyes were wet. "How long have you been awake?" Sarah asked. Eleanor's voice, when it came, was very quiet, quieter than Sarah had heard it. "Long enough." Eleanor set the glass down on the counter. She did not move toward Sarah. She did not leave either. She stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, and looked at the letter in Sarah's hands. "Sit down," Sarah said. It was not a request, not quite. Eleanor sat. The table between them was small. There was barely 2 feet of distance. After a moment, Sarah placed the letter on the wood, face up. Eleanor looked at it but did not reach for it. "Pruitt," Eleanor said. Just the name, like she was weighing it, testing it against something in her memory. "Yes," Sarah said. A silence settled over the kitchen. Outside, the snow had stopped sometime in the night. The trees were completely still. The whole world was quiet. "He called you Sarah P.," Eleanor said. "In his sleep sometimes, early on." She paused. "I told myself it was nothing. A dream. Something old." She looked at the table. "I was very good at telling myself things." "I know," Sarah said. Eleanor looked up. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise, more like recognition of a fact she had long suspected. I was 22 years old, Eleanor said. I was terrified of losing him, and I told myself it wasn't really lying, it was just redirecting. She stopped. Her voice had lost everything. The Manhattan polish, the iron composure. There was nothing left but an old woman at a table. That's what I told myself for 40 years. Did it work? Sarah asked. Eleanor looked at her. What do you think? Sarah thought about the empty Scotch glass, the study with no lights on, the woman sitting alone in her dead husband's house in January, in the middle of a forest, because nowhere else felt like the right place to be. No, Sarah said. I don't think it did. Eleanor reached out and touched the corner of the letter with one finger. Just the corner. She did not pick it up. She just touched it, the way you touch something you are not sure you are allowed to have. He was right, she said. He knew me better than I knew myself. Her voice went thin for just a moment, just one word. He always did. Sarah watched her. I owe you an apology, Eleanor said. She looked up. Her eyes were dry now, but only just. I owe you more than that, but I'll start there. 30 years. Sarah had carried 30 years of it. The silence after the letters stopped coming. The year she understood they were never going to come again. The daughter she raised alone, who had her father's eyes and would never know it. The market stall, the cold mornings. The woman 2 days ago who had laughed. She waited now to feel the rage. She had expected it. She had carried it so long it felt like part of her skeleton. She waited. It did not come. What came instead was something she had no name for. It was not forgiveness. She knew what forgiveness felt like. And this was not it. Not yet. It was something earlier than that, something quieter. Like the moment before a season changes, when you can't see it yet but the air already knows. She opened her mouth to speak. Her phone rang. It was loud in the silence. They both startled. Sarah looked down at the screen on the table where she'd left it charging. The name on the screen was Lily. She picked it up before she thought about it. Excuse me, she said to Eleanor and walked to the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a wall. The blizzard had stopped sometime in the night and the forest was absolutely still. Every branch held its weight of snow. Every sound was swallowed. The sky was white and low and close. She pressed the phone to her ear. Lily. Mom. Her daughter's voice was warm and a little sheepish. I know it's early. I know. But I had the strangest dream and I couldn't go back to sleep and I needed to hear your voice. Tell me, Sarah said. I know how this sounds. Lily laughed. It was a good laugh. Open and a little self-conscious, the laugh of someone who is sensible and knows it and sometimes wishes she weren't quite so sensible. There was a man, standing in the snow, just like in a field or something, I don't know where, and he was holding a letter out to you, just standing there, waiting. Sarah's breath came out in a long, slow cloud. Mom, you there? I'm here, she said. Go on. That was it, really. He just stood there holding it out. And you were walking toward him, but you never quite got there. I woke up before you reached him. A pause. I told you it was strange. It was a good dream, Sarah said carefully. Was it? Lily sounded uncertain. It felt, I don't know. Sad maybe, but not bad sad. More like something that happened a long time ago that finally got to be said out loud. Sarah pressed her free hand flat against the porch railing. The wood was cold through her glove. The snow in the yard was unmarked and smooth as paper. How is Portland? She asked. Cold, rainy. The bridge project is behind schedule. When isn't it? But we'll get there. Her daughter's voice shifted into its comfortable, capable register. Lily talked about her work the way she talked about everything she loved, matter-of-factly, without decoration, as if good things didn't require dressing up. She was a structural engineer. She understood how weight was distributed, how things were held up by what you couldn't see. She has her father's eyes, Sarah thought, not Tom's, the other one. She had thought it 1,000 times and never once said it aloud. Mom, Lily's voice again, quieter now. Are you okay up there, in that house? You sound different. I'm fine. It's just quiet here. Okay. A beat. I love you. I love you too, Sarah said. I love you so much. She stood on the porch for another moment after she hung up. The trees were still. The sky pressed down. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch gave way under its snow load and fell with a soft sound that barely disturbed anything at all. She went back inside. Eleanor was at the table. There was fresh coffee. Eleanor's eyes were dry but red at the rims, the careful look of someone who had taken themselves apart and put themselves back together while no one was watching. She pushed a second mug across the table without a word. Sarah sat down, wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic. "Richard's letter," she said. "He mentions that he knew about my daughter." Eleanor nodded slowly. "He did. He figured it out about 12 years ago." She looked down at her own mug. "He never told me." The kitchen was very quiet. "Is she—" Eleanor stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "Is she well?" And the way she asked it, careful, almost frightened, as if the answer carried a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to hold, told Sarah everything about what Eleanor already suspected. Everything she had not yet found the courage to say aloud. "She is," Sarah said. "She's 31 years old. She's a high school English teacher in Burlington. She has a dog named after a Bronte character, and she makes the best lemon cake I've ever tasted." She paused. "She's good, Eleanor. She's genuinely good." Eleanor nodded once. Something moved across her face that she did not try to name. Then Sarah said it, not as an accusation, not as a weapon, simply as a fact that had been true for 28 years and had simply never been spoken aloud in this room, or any room between the two of them. "Lily is Richard's daughter." Eleanor went very still, the kind of still that isn't shock, it's recognition, the kind that comes when something you have known in the back of your chest finally reaches your mouth and you realize you've been breathing around it for years. She turned her coffee mug in her hands, turned it again. "He had 2 children with me," she said at last, "both grown, both fine, distant."
She looked at the mug, not at Sarah. "He always wanted a daughter who read books." "Does she?" Eleanor asked. "Does Lily?" "Constantly," Sarah said. "She has 3 library cards." Eleanor almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her face, but it tried. What came next was not forgiveness. It wasn't confession exactly either.
It was something quieter and harder than both. 2 women, past 60, sitting in a snowbound kitchen, deciding to be honest with each other for the first time. Eleanor said, "I knew, on some level, that Richard had never fully arrived, not to our marriage, not to our house." She set the mug down carefully. "I thought if I held on tightly enough, eventually he would." She looked at her hands. "Turns out you can't hold a person into loving you the right way." Sarah thought of Tom Calloway, his steady hands, the way he'd shown up every single day without drama or distance, the particular mercy of a man who was simply, completely there. "No," she said, "you can't." A log shifted in the fireplace in the other room. The snow pressed against the window like something patient and enormous. "He asked me to find you," Eleanor said. "I didn't know who I was looking for, but I think this house knew." She didn't say it with irony. She didn't say it with embarrassment. "The agency sent me your name. I almost chose someone else. I still don't know why I didn't." Sarah didn't answer that. Some things don't need an answer. The silence between them had changed. It was still heavy. But it was a different kind of heavy. Not the weight of kept secrets, but the weight of truth, which is harder to carry and also somehow easier. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "About Lily?" Eleanor straightened in her chair. The old posture came back, shoulders level, chin steady. But it was different now. Less armored, more deliberate, like a woman choosing her spine rather than hiding behind it. "Richard left a request," she said. "I intend to honor it." She looked down at the letter still folded on the table between them. "But I need to know something first." She looked up directly at Sarah, and for the first time since the blizzard had locked them into this house together, Eleanor Harrington looked. Not powerful, not contemptuous, not wounded, just human. Just a woman in a kitchen at the edge of something she couldn't take back. Would she want to know? Sarah took a long time to answer. She looked at the table, at the letter still folded there between them, its paper soft and worn from 30 years of waiting. She thought about Lily at 8 years old, asking about her father with those steady dark eyes. She thought about the answer she had given. Tom's name, said simply and with love, because that was the truth that mattered then. She thought about Lily at 20, asking more carefully, and Lily at 28, calling from Portland in the early morning to describe a dream she couldn't shake, a man in the snow, a face she didn't recognize but somehow knew. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. I think she has a right to know, but it has to come from me first, and then, if she wants, from you. She paused. What does Richard's request actually say? In the legal sense? Eleanor stood. She went to the study without a word. When she came back, she was carrying a manila envelope, the kind that comes from an attorney's office, heavy and official. She set it on the table between them. He established a trust, Eleanor said, 18 months before he died, for a Lily Calloway of Portland, Oregon. Sarah went very still. His attorneys have been waiting for me to authorize the notification. Eleanor's voice was careful now, measured. I had 60 days from probate. I have 9 days left. Sarah stared at her. You've known about Lily for 9 days. I've known her name for 9 days, Eleanor said. I didn't know who her mother was until this morning. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, somewhere far down the road, they could both hear the low rumble of a plow working its way through the snow. The world outside coming back to life. How much? Sarah asked. Very quietly. Eleanor told her. Sarah put her face in her hands, not crying, just needing, for one moment, to not be seen. To sit with a number that meant security, options, freedom, all the things that had arrived in December envelopes over 30 years, finally said out loud and made permanent, finally signed with his name. When she looked up, Eleanor was watching her, and her expression was something Sarah had never seen on that face before. Not contempt, not pride. Something older than both of those things. Something that had been sitting in Eleanor Harrington for a very long time, waiting for a room it could finally breathe in. I know it doesn't fix it, Eleanor said. I know money isn't. She stopped, started again. But it's what he could do, and it's what I can do. And I am asking you. Her voice dropped just slightly. I am asking you to let me do it. Sarah looked at her. She looked at Eleanor Harrington as wealthy widow, former classmate, the woman who had sat 2 desks away in a Texas schoolroom and decided at 17 that she deserved more than her share of the world. The woman who had intercepted a letter and rewritten 2 lives with a single lie. The woman who had laughed at her rough hands over a market stall just 4 days ago. And she looked at the woman Eleanor was right now. Smaller, steadier, asking. Sarah reached across the table. She touched the manila envelope with 2 fingers, just rested them there on the corner of it, like she was checking whether something was real. Then she looked up. Call your attorney. Eleanor closed her eyes, just for a second. Then she opened them, reached into her cardigan pocket, and pulled out her phone. 3 weeks passed. Sarah was back at her stall on a Tuesday morning. The cold had not left, but it had changed its mind about something. The light was different, thinner, pale blue instead of gray, the kind of light that doesn't promise spring but admits it's possible. She arranged the new jars carefully. Quince preserve, deep amber, almost the color of old honey. She'd made them the week before, standing in her kitchen at midnight because she couldn't sleep. Her phone buzzed. Lily, a text. She called me, Mom. We talked for 2 hours. I don't know what to feel yet, but I'm glad I know. Are you okay? Sarah read it twice. Then she typed back. I'm okay. Come visit soon. She put the phone in her pocket and turned to help a customer, a woman in a red scarf, trying to decide between blackberry and quince. The quince, Sarah said quietly. It's better with cheese. The woman took 2 jars. Sarah made change and watched her go. Eleanor's attorney had contacted Lily 10 days after the blizzard. Eleanor herself had called 3 days after that. Lily described it to Sarah on the phone, slowly, like she was still sorting through it. She wasn't warm exactly, Lily said, but she was honest. She told me everything, and she was careful, like someone who learned kindness late and is trying very hard not to get it wrong. The trust had been authorized. A Portland attorney called Lily on a Wednesday. The call lasted 11 minutes and changed the rest of her life. Sarah had gone back to the dacha once more to return the keys and collect her coat. Eleanor was there. They didn't say much. Eleanor handed her a small package. Inside was a locket from one of the photographs on the wall. Richard's. He would have wanted you to have something real, Eleanor said. Not just money. Sarah held it for a moment, then she put it in her pocket next to her own locket.
The one she'd worn for years. The one with the photograph so small and old it was barely visible anymore. She had never shown anyone what was in it. She didn't need to. At the door, as Sarah was leaving, Eleanor said,
I'm going to sell this place. Sarah turned. Richard loved it here. I know, Eleanor said. That's why. A pause. I'm giving the money to the Millbrook Food Bank, in his name. She said it without drama, just a decision, made quietly by a woman finally putting something down she'd carried too long. He would have liked that, Sarah said. He used to buy extra at Pete's for them every fall. Eleanor looked at her sharply. She hadn't known that. And something in her face shifted, not all the way to peace, but toward it. Now, at the stall, a black SUV pulled into the square. Sarah watched it without surprise. Eleanor got out, different coat today, dark green. She walked to the stall and looked at the jars. She picked one up and read the label in Sarah's handwriting. I'll take 2, Eleanor said. $4 each, Sarah said. Eleanor paid. She held the jars carefully, the way you hold something you mean to keep. She looked at Sarah, not the way she had on that first day, not the appraising look, the look of someone who had done a hard thing and was still standing. I may be back next week, Eleanor said. I'll be here, Sarah said. Eleanor nodded. She walked back to her car. She didn't look back, but Sarah noticed no driver today. Just Eleanor, alone in a green coat, pulling carefully out of the square with 2 jars of quince preserve on the passenger seat. Sarah turned back to her stall. She touched the locket at her throat, her own, the old one. She looked up at the sky, pale blue, thin clouds, the suggestion of something warmer, not here yet, but coming. She thought about Richard, about Lily. About 30 years of a life built quietly, with her own hands in the cold. She thought it was enough. It was always enough. She reached for the next jar.